Now let's go to our next subject of the day. The government of Ethiopia and rebel authorities in Tigray this week reached a ceasefire agreement in Pretoria, South Africa, less than 48 hours before the second anniversary of the deadly conflict between them in northern Ethiopia. The surprise deal between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government and Tigrayan rebels was announced by former Nigerian President Chief Olusegun Obasanjo after just a week of negotiations led by the African Union and has been hailed by voices from the international community, including the United Nations and the United States.
Is the beginning of a new dawn for Ethiopia, for the Horn of Africa, and indeed for Africa as a whole. The two parties in the Ethiopian conflict have formally agreed to the cessation of hostilities, as well as to systematic, orderly, smooth, and coordinated disarmament, restoration of law and order, restoration of services, unhindered access to humanitarian supplies, protection of civilians, especially women, children, and other vulnerable groups, among other areas of agreement.
It is now for all of us to honor this agreement. We must be true to the letter and the spirit of this agreement. The people of Ethiopia expected more than the text of this agreement. They demand peace and harmony. They desire development. They have charted a promising and bright future. The government on its part will take various proactive measures to nurture democracy and inclusive development in the country.
So I hope our effort to silence the guns would be followed through in earnest, and our people deserve all the peace in the world, and we need to rebuild communities which have already been shattered as a result of such a bloody war that has continued for the last 2 years and still continues. And for us, we are ready to do everything to make sure that no effort on the part of spoilers would set us back on our commitment for peace.
In the meantime, the United States has expressed cautious optimism about peace in Africa after Ethiopia's warring sides agreed to a permanent cessation of hostilities. The two-year conflict affected hundreds of thousands of victims and may now have thrown up enormous challenges, including how to get all parties to lay down their arms or withdraw from the battle lines. Eritrea, which has fought alongside neighbors Ethiopia, was notably not part of the peace talks. It is not immediately clear to what extent the country's deeply repressive government, which has long considered Tigray authorities a threat, will respect the agreement.
The African Union's announcement of the signing of a cessation of hostilities between the government of Ethiopia and the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front represents an important step towards peace. We applaud the parties for their commitment to peace and reaching this agreement. We commend the African Union panel, former President Obasanjo, former President Kenyatta, and former Deputy President Labo Guka, on their extraordinary leadership and determined efforts to facilitate this peace process. Today we had an announcement. What we will have to see is follow through. And the United States will be there. We will be there to continue working with the African Union. They will continue to lead this process. But we will continue to engage directly with the African Union, to engage with those in the region who are facilitating this dialogue, and to continue engaging with the parties themselves. In the short period where this grain deal has been in doubt over the past couple days, we've seen grain prices rise. We've seen shippers and insurers call into question the viability of their operations in this region. It's our goal to see to it that there is predictability, that there is stability in this marketplace, and by setting this initiative back on track, by working and supporting the Turks and the UN and the other parties to see that this initiative is not only set back in motion, but it's renewed later this month. that will ultimately inject even more predictability and stability into this marketplace, and most importantly, apply downward pressure to food prices. Just as we're using every tool and will use every tool to counter what the Iranian provision of weapons to Russia, we will do the same when it comes to the DPRK's provisions of weapons to Russia.
Ambassador Segun Akinsanya was Nigeria's ambassador to Ethiopia with concurrent accreditation to Djibouti, as well as permanent representative to the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, based in Addis Ababa. He also served as regional representative of the Institute for Security Studies, a Pan-African policy research institution and think tank on peace and security matters. He is the first vice president of the Association of Retired Career Ambassadors of Nigeria. Ambassador Akinsanya now joins us to take a look at the significance of this breakthrough in negotiations. Good to have you, Ambassador Akinsanya, on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show.
Thank you very much, Ruben. It's always a pleasure to be on the program.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, what is the guarantee that the latest development in terms of the cessation of hostilities will endure, considering the fact that there were similar talks in August that failed? By the beginning of October, all the parties involved, Eritrea, Ethiopia, the TPLF, they were mobilizing forces. And then in these negotiations, the Eritreans were not even part of it. What is the guarantee that this would stand and endure?
Well, thank you, Ruben. Let me say I like your intro. Yes, Ethiopia, with the appellation, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, is a federal state with multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and diverse, and is the second largest country in terms of population after Nigeria. So what has happened over the years in terms of this fratricidal civil war that heralded Abiy Ahmed's coming in? First, I think it's good to give certain perspectives about Ethiopia. It has gone through various systems, monarchical under Haile Selassie, the Marxist communist under Mengistu Haile Mariam, and a sort of pseudo-democratic coalition, democratic coalition under Meles and Haile Desalem. And over the years, there have been a coalition. And the EPRF, that coalition, loose coalition with the Tigrayans in the majority and, you know, playing very critical parts. And the Tigrayans are in the minority. And during the rule of Mengistu Haile Mariam, they were in the trenches in Sudan, and they fought Mengistu to a standstill and came out and then were in charge. This coalition was on, and the Tigrayans coalition, that were in the majority, were in control of the political and economic power in Ethiopia. And, you know, but when Abiy Ahmed came in, with a lot of fanfare, with a lot of acceptance, he freed a lot of people that were in exile. He freed a lot of people. He was popular. But one thing that he did is that he was going to come out with his reforms, and that he was not going to be part of that coalition. Of course, the Tigrayans that have been there, because they're in the north, were not happy about this, and this is what led to all the fratricidal and genocidal conflict. It's what is civil. In fact, there was a time that the Tigrayans were heading on to Addis Ababa, I know Addis Ababa is the political and diplomatic capital of Africa. So it arouses a lot of interest and but the truth that President Obasanjo brokered within the flagship project of the AU, silencing the guns, was welcome. Was welcome in terms of immediate cessation of hostilities, bringing some peace to that Horn of Africa, bringing peace to Ethiopia, and ensuring that what the Tigrayans have suffered over the years was sort of, assuaded. But the fear is that the sustenance of this peace agreement is just a first step. In fact, some people have called it constructive absurdity. Some commentaries, in terms of, is it going to last? What is going to be the verification processes? What is going to be, because the Tigrayans have suffered a lot in terms of people, rape, and quite a lot of it, and there have been forced displacements to Sudan, and the fear of the international community and what people are saying is that, seeing what has happened, is it going to be immediate to build that trust? And as you rightly said, the Tigrayans, the Eritreans, who had a long battle with Ethiopia, and an accord that Abiy Ahmed brokered that earned him the Nobel Prize, were not mentioned. Were not mentioned at all in the accord. You have Eritrean forces just in the guise of being a federal state that are still stationed in the north in Mekele area. They are still stationed. That what is going to be the role of the Eritrean forces and others that are fighting alongside with the Ethiopians. So this is what has really brought some doubts. That is it going to be the Uhuru in terms of the peace accord, in terms of the truce? But as some people said, and as President Obasanjo himself said, the commitment, it's important that the foreign factions, both the Ethiopian forces and the Tigrayans, that are now known as rebels, in brackets, live up to the expectations in terms of ensuring that there's a ceasefire, there's immediate cessation, there's disarmament. But what is very important, what is critical, is trust. Hoping that there will be post-conflict reconstruction processes that would allow for, cessation or the cessation of guns, but it's the first step. It is a first step in the run-up, and I believe that the AU and the panel, the process that has been started by President Obasanjo, AU will not keep his hands off this process, and many other interested parties, the United States and others, would ensure that what has been achieved in a modest fashion is further built upon.
Well, which takes me to my next point.
Nigeria has a very important role to play.
Yeah, which takes me to my next point. We've talked about the AU, which brokered this process. I was going to ask you about the role of the international community in all of this. Some countries have been accused of taking sides in that conflict since November 2020, when hostilities broke out. China, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Somalia, supporting Ethiopia and Eritrea, and almost getting actively involved in other people's wars. And then there have been war crimes on all parts, either the TPLF or the Ethiopian government or the Eritrean government. Now, this peace accord that has been signed, Does it in any way address the war crimes that have been committed? Does it address, the role of the international community, who may still stoke fires, embers of discord?
Well, it's not going to be rocket science, Ruben. We see all this sort of thing happening in Africa. When there is some peace is brokered, and we have a lot of interests, in terms of either support, either supply of arms, or, But I didn't see in the preliminary, in the contract, in the agreement about the war crime, but I'm sure that there will be this, the civil society organizations, interested parties will not leave it, because as I said, the Tigrayans, as the Ethiopians call them, have really suffered. There are massive killings, and there are forced displacements. And this will sooner or later come in one aspect in terms of, they are going to be, because there have been genocide. It's like, the massive destruction of the Mekele area of the north, where the Tigrayans and the Tigrayans are very strong. They have held military, political, and economic power. So I won't be surprised that if, as time goes on, the possibility of war crimes might come in terms of the impunity. But AU has to have, particularly the Peace and Security Council, has to have its hands on it. And I must say that we have an interest. The Commissioner of Political and Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, is a young, dynamic person that has been doing quite a lot in terms of looking at governance, peace and security, and human rights violations all over in Africa. So it will be surprised as time goes on that things like this would come up in terms of what the Ethiopian forces have done, a massive overkill capacity on the Eritrean population. Because the Eritreans are still very important. We have other tribes like the Oromians, the Amharas, and so on. And one element of the Ethiopian constitution is that it provides possibility for people to leave the system, if by any way, to leave the federation. So I'm sure that, as President Obasanjo mentioned, is the very first step in other processes towards a durable peace deal in the context of the EU's silencing the guns project.
Well, Ambassador, you are referring to Article 39, subsection 1 of the 1995 Constitution of Ethiopia. But the Tigrayans, they are not saying they want to secede. They want to take over the government at the center after having been in charge of the government for more than 28 years. And they are accusing Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of ethnic marginalization, which is curious, because when Abiy Ahmed came into office, what he tried to do was to form a coalition and start a new party called Prosperity Party, which the Tigrayans said they will not be a part of it. Isn't it curious that the people of Tigray and the Tigray Defense Forces, they don't want out. They in fact want to seize the center. And yet, Abiy Ahmed got a Nobel Prize for promoting peace.
That's the irony of history. Now, Ruben, it's not going to be that easy. I told you because when I was Nigerian ambassador to Ethiopia and PR to the African Union and the ECA, we have a coalition, Ethiopian People's EPDRF, they call it. But the TPLF, the Tigrayans, were playing more domineering role, even though they were in the minority. And of course, that was what put many of the Amharas, the Oromos, and others into jails. Some were perpetually in exile. So, you know, it's not going to be easy, right, for having been in power for a period of 20 to 32 years with political, economic, and military powers. I mean, you all know the role that Meles Zenawi played as a Pan-Africanist. He won the hearts of many Ethiopians in spite of the atrocities that the Tigrayan government was seen to be committing at that time. But to have left that place, and when Abiy Mohammed came, in fact, he won the hearts of many people. He got his peace. He became a Nobel Prize winner. He freed a lot of, he brokered peace with Eritrea that have been at loggerhead with Ethiopia for years. So all these things were some of the things that won the hearts of Abiy Mohammed into that. But when he came in, there were proposals that the coalition could continue, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Front could continue. But he doesn't want that. He came out with massive reforms. He formed his own party. This is one of the remote causes of the problem that why the Tigrayans were not happy. That we have been in power, we had this coalition, we had the Oromos, we had the Amharas in that coalition. I mean, you came in as a young man with all the fanfare, with all the acceptance, but why don't you continue with the coalition? Maybe if they had continued with that coalition with Abiy Ahmed gradually winning himself to the hearts of Ethiopians and then now forming a party. But within 2 years, he marginalized the Tigrayans and he put them back into their cocoon in the regional area where they are, still with the federal forces that is led by the Eritreans. Of course, the Tigrayans were not happy. They fought like a wounded lion. At the time, they said they want to have their elections. He delayed the process by saying that because of COVID. But eventually, they went ahead to have their elections. And it's right, there was a massive Ethiopian forces against the Tigrayans. And this goes deep. So well, even though the Tigrayans were not secede, but I see the persistence of these insurgents because of the nature of the Tigrayans, just like the Oromos and the others too. They're very warlike. Ethiopia was never colonized by any colonial power. On the contrary, they fought the Italians to a standstill at the Battle of Padua. So it's the ethnicity, the religiosity, and the multidimensional, diverse society in Ethiopia, which is very complex. And most importantly, they are very nationalistic. So I don't see it just going through like that. Interested parties, the AU in particular, needs to really continue with this peace process and ensuring that the fragile peace deal or truce is maintained, is scheduled in such a way that there will be lasting peace eventually for a place like Ethiopia. My colleagues in the AU those days used to tell me that Nigeria and Ethiopia are the same in terms of the multiplicity and ethnicity, that what is only different between the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia is the democracy that is inbuilt in their constitution. They just say this jokingly. But I must say that Ethiopia is important for Africa. It's important for the world. And I believe that with their historical antecedents, the culture and the history, all hands will be on deck to ensure that this peace is durable and guns are silenced. Okay,
Ambassador, just two quick questions. And, you know, as we begin to round up with this conversation now, the first one, it's been suggested that given his role in bringing Ethiopia and Tigray to this moment that President Olusegun Obasanjo deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. He's been praised by everyone for the efforts that he has put in. What do you think? That's one. And second is, what lessons can Nigeria draw from this? Because it looks like, as you have pointed out, the complexity, the power play, and also the ethnic politics. Abiy Ahmed is Oromo. The Tigrays, they are not likely to trust him and all of that. What lessons can we learn from their experience in that part of Africa?
Well, you mentioned the fact that Abiy Mohammed came in within a year or 2 years of his ascension to be a Nobel Prize winner. There are many Nigerians that I believe, from my own perspective, what they have done in Africa deserves a peace prize. President Obasanjo, former head of state Abubakar, also Abdul Salam Abubakar deserves the peace prize because of what he did in Darfur and other places. But be that as it may, that is just it, But I believe that there are a lot of lessons to learn. I belong to some, Pan-African think tanks that believe that, in terms of democracy and the triple nexus between peace, security, and development, they are interlinked, intertwined, interconnected. And constitution, one thing about the Ethiopian constitution is its simplicity. I mean, you need to pick up a copy to read. It is readers friendly. It is not complex. And people have been talking in Nigeria about the need to draw up a new constitution, to amend our constitution, to make it less complex, to make it readable, and to ensure that it is. So it's also related to the idea of restructuring that the lesson that can be learned from Ethiopia is the fact that we need to make our constitution simpler and less rancorous than what we are seeing now. The ethnic diversity and religion are very important elements in African history that you cannot jettison. But what is important is that we need to manage diversities. We need to learn to manage diversities because that is one of the brain problems that is facing African countries. And then implementation of agreements. Implementation. Capacity to be able to implement decisions. It took about 35 years to broker peace in South Sudan on the CPA, Comprehensive Program Agreement. One of the elements that was discovered at that time was the capacity of those that were negotiating. And I think we have a lot to learn from what is happening, and vice versa. They believe that they will learn it from Nigeria because they are the largest recipients of our Peace Corps, our volunteers that were serving. So I think the two countries have been the largest in terms of population in Africa. It's to work together, and I'm sure that there will still be a lot to do in terms of our collaboration between Nigeria, Federal Republic of Nigeria, and Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Akinsanya, for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show. Thank you very much indeed.